Hello and welcome to the video, and thanks for joining me again. Now in today's sale preview we're going to look at three items. Firstly, this small charming little silver vinaigrette, this early 19th century percussion cap pistol, and the last item just behind me, this George III oak long case clock. So first of all, we'll deal with the piece that I'd like to own, the thing I would take home if I could, and it's this small little silver vinaigrette. So first we'll talk about what that actually is. What does it mean? So historically, what were they used for? Well, if you open it up inside, you can see this little pierced grill, and the grill also opens, and inside that would be contained a small piece of sponge which the owner would soak in an aromatic vinegar or a perfume. So you could just pop open that grill and smell that nice, pleasant smell. So back in the 19th century, where sanitation was not what it is today, there'd be unpleasant and foul smells throughout streets of busy towns and cities. So if you were having to walk through those streets and be around that unpleasant environment, you could pop open that little grill and just get a little bit of respite from those foul smells by smelling inside this vinaigrette. And they're also very portable, so they could be tucked away in a pocket or inside a lady's bag, for example. Illness at the time was also linked with foul smells. People believed that inhaling nasty aromas could leave them susceptible to disease, so having this there was their sort of protection from that. Now, these little objects at the time would have been expensive. I mean, they were made by skilled craftsmen out of precious metals. So it would have been a sign of status to own one of these, and also to own the expensive perfumes that you would have put inside there. So that's another reason for carrying one of these lovely little things. So normally with silver, like we discussed in the last sale preview, it's very easy to date precisely to the year, to the town or city where it was made or assayed, and to the maker. But unfortunately with this very small item, there's only a partial set of hallmarks on there. On the inside of the cover, we've got this little head. That's the duty mark. That shows Queen Victoria. Now, silver throughout the George III, William IV and Queen Victorian eras, a duty had to be paid on silver, and so they're all required by law to have the duty stamp to show that duty had been paid. So we see that's got Victoria's head, so we know it's at least Victorian. It's also got a maker stamp, GW. It's got the lion passant to show that it's silver. On the underside, it's got a date letter Q in Old English, but nowhere on this is there a town or city assay mark. So without that bit of information, we can't tie down the exact year or maker. But we know it's Victorian. Vinaigrettes, like so many other objects in our trade, have lost any real-world context now and have no real meaning or use anymore. I mean, nobody's going to carry one of these around for their original intended purpose. I mean, sanitation, thankfully, is much better these days, so it's not really needed. So why are they still saleable and why are they of interest? I mean, obviously there's the history of the item, which is quite fascinating. As we've said, these were all made by superb craftsmen. This is really nicely made. But I think what's nice about them, they're so collectible. I mean, it's nice small size, so you can collect quite a lot of these without them taking up too much room. They do come in a variety of different shapes, sizes and designs by all different makers throughout the Georgian and to the Victorian period. So there's plenty of different things to buy. And also they're quite common, so you do get plenty of opportunity to bid on this type of thing. It's all good and well collecting the most rare objects, but first of all you need an awful lot of money. And secondly, you don't get that much opportunity because in their very nature they're rare. So sometimes it might not be that satisfying because you're not getting enough opportunity to collect. Normally they just come in a little rectangular shape with some nice decoration on. This one, for example, is nicely engraved with these scrolls, trailing leaves on the top and this sort of zigzag band on the back. But what's nice about this one, and I've never seen one, is that it's of this sort of purse shape. And I did a little bit of digging and did find quite a few. And some of the very best ones on the top have this sort of castle decoration, as they call it, castle top decoration with these cathedrals, etc. I mean, those fetch in the high hundreds. Now this one once you start looking online, you get to know that there's something missing. It should have a strap across the top there, where these two little pins are either side. I did find some complete examples online, going between sort of £200 and £300. But in view of this one's damage and the fact that we couldn't pin down a maker, we put only 30 to 50 estimate on there. But there are 7 watches online. It's got an auto bid of only £18. So I think 30 to 50 should be quite easy, and I don't think I'll be surprised if it just pushes over the top. So next it's the wishlist item, this percussion cap pistol. So the wishlist feature, this is where I look at the item that so far has got the most interest online, which forces me to look at areas within antiques that maybe I wouldn't normally look at, and prods me to do a little bit more research. It's an interesting feature, I think. But this pistol so far has got 10 washes online. Now there's a couple of reasons for that. Obviously we've spoke before about the come by me estimate. This one's estimated in the catalogue at only 30 to 50, which is definitely on the low side. And the idea behind that, of course, is an auctioneer underestimates something on purpose to drive interest. The other thing, the nature of what it is, it's a gun. Anything like guns, swords, clocks, that kind of thing, we spoke about them before, mantiques. So if you have something like this in an auction, guaranteed almost every male viewer who comes to the view is going to flock straight to it, pick it up, start wielding it, flinging it around, cocking the hammer, all that kind of stuff. They just, people love them for whatever reason. So the low estimate, the fact that it's an antique pistol, that's part of the reason that's high up there in the wish list. So let's get to it then. Starting with its age, it's definitely 19th century. Now, I learnt this painful lesson a while ago. We had a percussion cap pistol in. It was a nice silver mounted example. I catalogued it as Georgian. Now I got lots and lots of emails straight away saying that the percussion cap mechanism, this hammer there with that little nipple there, that didn't come in until 1820. So there's no such thing as an 18th century percussion cap pistol. Before that there would have been flintlock, but we'll get into that another day. You do get flintlock pistols that have been converted to percussion cap pistols, but let's not confuse matters. Let's just get on with looking at this pistol in particular. So on the lock plate there, it's stamped up 1858 Enfield. And that's where the Royal Small Arms factory was. This is a UK government-owned rifle factory in the London borough of Enfield. That's if we're to believe the markings on there. They can always be put on there afterwards, of course. But that aside, I mean, it is a nice quality percussion cap pistol. The stock there, that goes right through from the butt to the end, almost to the end of the muzzle there, so we call that a full stock rather than a half stock, which would only go to there. It incorporates this swiveling ramrod, which should swivel around to the inside there. And it's also got on the butt there, on this brass mount, this little lanyard loop, and so that's so you could clip a lanyard to it and to your person, so it's safely secured to your body. This was a feature of Royal Navy pistols and also for the cavalry. If you're on a ship in rough seas, or if you're on horseback riding, there's definitely scope there for this to be flung out of your hand, and if it's connected to a lanyard, it'll just trail below you, and then you can reclaim your sidearm. So it's to keep it on your person at all times. Whereas if you're a soldier on foot, that's not needed. You can drop the pistol, you could pick it up. So if you see that little lanyard loop, it's highly likely that it's for the cavalry or for the navy. When looking at these, I always think it's fascinating to think about the actual mechanics of how you work one of these things. You don't sort of load it in the breech there. Everything has to be loaded in the muzzle. So you'd go in first with gunpowder through your powder flask. That'd be a measured amount of gunpowder. Then the lead ball goes in, and then a piece of wadding, which is I think paper or card, which keeps everything in the barrel, so it's not just dropping out when you're in pursuit of the enemy. The ramrod is then used to tamp it down nice and tight within the barrel of the weapon. If the hammer's cocked back on this little nipple there, that's where you put your percussion cap, and when you pull the trigger, the hammer flies forward and hits that percussion cap, sending a spark down there to ignite the gunpowder, and then as the gunpowder ignites, the gases force the ball out through the end of the muzzle and hopefully into your enemy before he or she can attack you. So that estimate I've already said was 30 to 50. That's definitely on the low side. There are 10 people watching online. We've got a book bid of 60 that's already been beaten by the auto bids, so we're up to £95 online with the competitive bidding. Again, we discussed competitive bidding in the last video. You can check that out. It's titled Competitive Bidding. So the internet's taken it to 95 already. I think I'm going to say £100 to £200. So the reason I wanted to eventually talk about a long case clock is because, I mean, to the layman at least, they're absolutely synonymous with our world, the world of antiques. Everybody knows that iconic shape. There's the song My Grandfather's Clock, so we all have seen and know the shape of long case clocks. But what people don't know is how affordable they are in today's market. I know this for a fact because I've had to value them on numerous occasions when people have either bought them years ago when the antique trade was a different landscape, or if people have inherited the clocks and they've been told, you know, by relatives, you know, when I've gone, this clock is yours and it's worth a fortune, etc., etc. So when you actually value these things, you can see that people are disappointed with how the market's performing at the moment. I think pretty much all long case clocks, we'll call them, or grandfather clocks, they're all sort of imposing and very handsome looking. I mean, this one was made probably around 1750, 1760. So what's that? It's getting on for 260, 270 years old. In terms of the works inside, they look at first complicated, but they're in fact not. They're just quite simple mechanical things, as long as they're kept fairly clean and oil regularly. There's nothing can really go wrong with these things. If they're looked after. I mean, we've seen clocks at this sort of age still keeping very good time. So they not only look great, they're very functional things. So I thought it might be a good idea if we were to run through the setup of the clock. So if you were going to buy a long case clock to take it home, set it up to get it running. So first of all, this is an 8-day clock. We can tell this because there are 2 winding holes there. So inside there are 2 weights. Here they are, they're quite heavy. So this is an 8-day clock. That means it'll run for 8 days continuous and then it'll need rewinding, as opposed to a 30-hour clock which just has 1 weight, which won't have any winding holes on the face. That'll run for only 30 hours. So every day the clock will have to be wound again. But let's first attach the pendulum. To do this you need to remove the hood. There we go, hood's off. This reveals the dial there, and you can also see the works in the side. So we have the pendulum, they're usually, this one's stored inside. What's important when looking at pendulums is that the feather is still intact. Those are, I don't know if they're sprung steel or something like that, but they're very easily can be damaged. I can see this one is actually being a replacement, but that's no bad thing. At least it's there, so it's hopefully going to work. And it threads inside through there and onto this little anchor there. So the pendulum now is hanging from the works, and this just regulates the time. So let's put on the weights, make sure the strings are untangled there, and we hang one on first. Now this catgut or string can be very old, so you need to make sure that's not going to drop down, but it looks like it's pretty strong. That's going to hold that in place. The other one's way up inside there, so now the reason it's got 2 weights, there's a drum behind each one that string or catgut is wound around. That works on a ratchet, so the weight is always pulling down, wanting to unwind that barrel, but it's the pendulum that allows that to happen. So as that ticks, it moves the ratchet on one each time. If the pendulum was removed, it would tick down much faster. So that's needed to regulate time and make sure it runs and keeps good time. So 1 weight and 1 drum, that power reserve is for the time itself. The other one is to operate the chiming mechanism. So first we'll set that pendulum going. 1 tick is longer than the other. So we know from that the clock is not stood level. And this is very, very important. The clock's got to be level to be set up correctly. Otherwise, eventually, the shorter tick is going to run down to nothing and the clock will stop. But it does sound like it's going. And we can see this clock's got two subsidiary dials. The one at the top is for seconds, so we know that's advancing. We can see that, but it is drawing back a little bit. That's because the tick is a little irregular because the clock is leaning to one side. Now the subsidiary dial below, that's a date chapter. So this will keep in line with days of the month with the calendar. So it is a fairly sophisticated movement. It does time in seconds, minutes and hours. It keeps the date for you, and it's also chimes. So let's see about the chime. There is a bell there. So this could be pretty loud, especially with the hood off. So it is working, but that hammer is some distance off from the bell, so it does require a little further setup. But it's encouraging that it's working. These, as I said, these are quite loud, so if you live in a fairly small house, you probably don't want that engaged. All you would need to do is remove the weight from that side so it wouldn't strike. But with very little setup, we've got this clock in particular running, so it wouldn't take much to get that sat at home. And once it's comfortable in that environment with the temperatures, I'm sure after about a week and having it set up right, this would keep great time. Put the hood back on. So the door's a bit loose. Yeah, so there's obviously some issues there, so we'll talk through them all. Now the dial is probably the best thing about this clock. Brass dials are quite favoured. It's got those decorative spandrels on the corners. It's got a silvered chapter ring, this silvered maker's mark at the top. So it is really a nice, smart looking dial. It's got the maker's mark on there so we know who made it. And it is working, so these are all things working in its favour. Now we get to the case, and that's really what lets this clock in particular down. As we can see, the door there is loose. The trunk there is quite badly faded. This bottom panel there is cracked in two places there. The colour for oak is absolutely horrible. It's horrendous. It's this orange colour, which is not pleasant at all. So one of two things need to happen. Either the movement and dial is rehoused in a nicer case, or the case needs to be just smartened up a little bit. So what does all this mean for value, and how affordable are these clocks, as I did promise earlier? Well, we've got an estimate of only £100 to £200, which is absolutely amazing, given that this clock is 260 years old, and with very little messing about with, could start working. The clock case could be looked after a little bit. So £100 to £200 I think is no money for it at all. There's only 2 people watching it online, and the auto bids online are only at £60 now. So if we don't get up to the top end, it will be a disappointing result for what really is a charming old clock. So thanks so much for coming along and watching the video. If you did enjoy it, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. Just click the subscribe button below. It is free. You can unsubscribe at any time. These videos are every Saturday. There'll be a video next Saturday where we'll look at those 3 items and we'll see what they made at the auction and see if I got the estimates right. And if you come into the sale and you buy any of those 3 items, or you underbid them or were interested in them, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe we can do an interview and talk about them on the next YouTube video. Is there anything I forgot? Have a really great week, everybody.